Hello and welcome back to the Retro Perspective series covering each and every issue of the official PlayStation magazine. This time we have issue 7 from June of 1996. Editor Steve Jarrett opens this issue by giving us a look at the sales figures of the PlayStation magazine, which at the time was bought by a massive 41,925 people every month. He says, "This places us head and shoulders above the competition and makes this mighty organ the world's best-selling PlayStation magazine." However, this is not such a good month for PlayStation software, as we've been graced with some of the lowest scoring games we've ever seen. These blips in quality are inevitable, however, so fear not, for our update and pre-play sections are packed with some tasty morsels which are testament to the increasing strength of PlayStation. Some big news in this issue with a first look at Crash Bandicoot, the eponymous start of a new US title coded by Naughty Dog Software. One of the new breed of 3D platform games, Crash Bandicoot is set to go up against Knights on Sega Saturn and Super Mario 64 on Nintendo 64. And the good news is that by all accounts, Crash Bandicoot may be the best of the bunch. Sony insiders hinted that Crash Bandicoot was the best game they'd ever seen, and sure enough, SC's own internal evaluation team rated it higher than any other title, far outscoring the likes of Wipeout and Destruction Derby. In fact, the results were checked twice because no one believed them the first time round. And in another step towards global domination, Squaresoft has recruited a dream team of 8 programmers to work on its new 3D beat-em-up, Tobal No. 1. The wording of this is quite interesting, as the development team turned out to be called Dream Factory, but maybe PSM already knew this. 2 more big news stories, big in the sense that they take up 4 pages in the magazine, but not really big in the sense that there's much interesting to read. These are reports from the PlayStation Expo 96 in Japan and ECTS, which is a trade show that took place in London. These pages are practically a boatload of announcements that happened at these shows for new games coming out at the time, which obviously would have been interesting back then, but right now it's not really worth going over. For the pre-plays this month, PSM had been sent a new build of the Japanese version of Resident Evil. In PSM 2 we took an early look at Capcom's horror adventure title, Resident Evil, claiming somewhat spuriously that we wouldn't get to see the gore in all its glory. In other words, we thought our blood would be green, while our pals, well NTSCs, in Japan would get the full-on red stuff. Not so. We too shall see blood of the rouge variety, though Resident Evil will have a voluntary 18 certificate. The Japanese version is now finished, it's called Biohazard over there, and we've been playing it purely for the purposes of research, you understand, and best of all, we'll have the PAL translation for review next month. Resident Evil looks stunning, the texture mapping is clinical, the wallpaper looks like, well, wallpaper, and we've tripped on the carpets. Best then that we don't tell you too much because the definitive review will be in the next issue. Tekken 2 was covered extensively in the previous issue, where I mentioned that they just basically gush about Tekken constantly in this magazine, but they felt it necessary to do a full pre-play in this issue as well. Everyone in the office has gotten themselves terribly excited about Namco's sequel, The Master of All It Surveys, the original incarnation of Tekken. Officially the finest beat-em-up in the borough. No sooner had we unwrapped the package, the disc was in the machine, and not a tap could be heard upon keyboard across the office. Tekken 2 has some incredible features, not least of which is the wireframe option, a screenshot of which perched directly on your left. It's actually on the right. If you hold down both the left shoulder buttons on the fighter's screen, you can now put yourself virtually in the body of your pugilist. You can, after a bit of practice, duck and weave as you see the fists and feet fly in the first-person perspective. It's an acquired taste, and though it adds to the one-player game, you can't play with 2, unless of course there's a secret link-up option we haven't found. I actually had no idea this feature existed in early Tekken games, I'll have to try it out next time I'm playing. Next up, Space Hulk. This isn't the first game that fantasy role-playing innovator Games Workshop has delved into the world of computers and consoles. Retrace your steps to PSM2 and you'll find a pre-play on Warhammer Shadow of the Horned Rat, due to be released by Mindscape this summer. Like Space Hulk, it is based on one of Games Workshop's most successful battle systems, but Space Hulk is one of the few Games Workshop titles to succeed in the more general games market, thanks to the intervention of games giant MB. Along with fellow system Hero Quest, Space Hulk found itself being released for the masses as an approachable board game back in 1989, complete with miniature figures and a relatively user-friendly rulebook. This was indeed a turning point for Games Workshop and role-playing as a whole. Space Hulk is more akin to something like Doom, but it is not a Doom clone. True, you view most of the combat through a first-person perspective, coupled with a head-up display, but its gameplay involves a more strategical approach than the wanton destruction of Doom. The world of Space Hulk is relatively uncomplicated. Good defends the cosmos from evil. Good comes in the guise of masses of Terminator Marines, which are divided into 1,000 chapters, each chapter comprising 1,000 Marines. Evil is an alien race of gene stealers, vicious alien creatures with 6 limbs, amplified intelligence, and a complete hatred for anything and everything. And just to make life challenging, you're coupled with the good guys. Mindscape were working on 2 games at the time, one of which being Marvel 2099 AD. PSM hadn't yet seen it in action other than a few pre-rendered screens. Then there's Steel Harbinger, which is a strange looking game to say the least. There aren't many viewed from behind a bikini-clad female temptress shoot-'em-ups. The stateside office of Mindscape is going some way to redressing this neglected area of the genre with Steel Harbinger. The year is 2069, and metallic tendrils have transformed our beautiful Earth into a gruesome nightmare. The only consolation is that it's happening in America. Publisher Telestar is bringing another football game to the PS1. It's called Onside, and I'm wondering what will set this one apart from all the others. Onside will be the 7th PlayStation football title to enter this competitive genre, though it's probably fair to say that the game has been kicking around longer than all the other footy games, with news of its existence first springing up well before PlayStation's launch. Onside differs noticeably from its rivals in that it offers an ample amount of soccer management alongside all the usual arcade on-pitch shenanigans. You can sit back on the bench and let the computer determine the outcome of your matches, recapping at full time, with highlights of the day's play. Onside incorporates all the top teams from each of the 4 European leagues, with player stats and attributes varying accordingly. A Super League can be created with any of these teams, or you can simply battle through a season as already laid out in the game. Onside boasts advertising links with McDonald's and Reebok, whose logos are displayed on the hoardings, while the game's packaging features a rather fetching picture of Manchester United's Peter Schmeichel. I've no clue. Moving on, as always, let's take a look at the most interesting reader letters from this month's issue.
Good in theory. I'm writing to ask, as Andrew Soon did a PSM5 PS upgrade imminent, about maybe not a hard drive, but a memory card which has at least 20 megs of memory, with a compression of 1:4 ratio. This would enable ID, Williams, to bring out Doom 2 but with an extra bit and editor, so those of us could complete it and design our own levels. Also, your mag is perfectly brilliant, -1 thing. The CD is full of demos with the occasional FMV. Wouldn't it be a bit more fun for yourself and the programmers as well as the public to design a full game, only graphically improved with only about 5 or 6 levels, once every 3 months? Neil Papworth, Southampton.
The memory card slot and the expansion ports offer a wealth of upgrade ideas for the PlayStation, but whether any companies will take the risk of producing one-off gadgets is unlikely. Sadly, the same goes for the CD. There are lots of things that would be absolutely brilliant to have, but so far we've had no offers of technical demos. The problem is that most coders are too busy writing software to sell. and full PlayStation development kits cost upwards of £17,000. That's an awful lot of money to spend writing a game for no financial reward.
After reading the Squaresoft joined Sony news feature in PSM5, I got all excited by the fact that my favorite RPGs such as Secret of Mana and Chrono Trigger would now be converted onto the PlayStation. Being an ex-SNES owner and RPGs being my favorite type of game, I just can't wait. But what I want to know is whether any of these titles will ever make a UK release. I don't want to be put in the position of fiddling with converters or buying expensive imported games from mail-order companies as I did with my SNES. I really don't think that Japan should keep all these titles to itself with the occasional US conversion. Many titles which were never released over here on the SNES took the machine's power to its fullest. Secret of Mana 2, for example, was probably one of the most playable games on the machine ever. It seemed a shame that UK and US gamers would never be treated to it. So in order to release Square games on the PlayStation over here, Sony of Japan is going to have to be convinced that there's an RPG market over here after all. I have no doubts. But how much of a say does Sony UK have on PlayStation imports? Scott Monroe, Inverness.
Certainly Sony's first priority will be to release Square's games in Japan, where they are immensely popular, followed by the US. With the game still many months away from completion, it's not yet known whether or not we'll get English-speaking versions, but at least with the software on CD, it's much less of a financial risk to launch RPGs in Europe. Chances are we'll get some, if not all of them.
In a preview of Fade to Black, you spoke to designer Paul Cussett. When discussing the differences between PC and PlayStation versions, he said the PlayStation version had 64,000 colors over the PC's 256. I always thought the PlayStation could only display 32,768 colors.
The PlayStation can actually display 24-bit images, or 16,777,216 colours. Of course, this is more colours than the PlayStation has pixels and is massively processor intensive, so this mode is primarily reserved for FMV. For most games, programmers opt for 15-bit images, and many games may even drop to 8-bit graphics with just 256 colours on screen to keep the frame rate up. Fade to Black, in all likelihood, will probably feature 15-bit graphics.
Reading various reports in Edge magazine, I'd been given the impression that the PlayStation's geometry engine can display 1.5 million flat-shaded polygons per second, yet its CPU restricts it to 500,000. The PlayStation is also said to be able to display 360,000 fully textured, Gouraud-shaded and light source polygons per second. However, Total NBA, the game said to have the highest polygon count, has only 210,000. Could you give me your honest opinion as to whether it can really display the aforementioned 360,000 polygons per second without resorting to Sony's biased figures?
Most polygon counts are based on triangular polygons, 50 pixels by 50 pixels, but then most software uses polygons bigger than that, which immediately throws the polygon count into oblivion. These figures also don't take into account the processor overheads, like actually running the game. You can no doubt get the PlayStation to display its theoretical limit, but don't bet on it being too interactive. Now on to the main feature of the magazine, which is surround sound. For those of you who don't remember when surround sound first came out, pretty much just imagine 3D TVs and then just it's that basically. It's a fad, it's a gimmick. My experience of surround sound is basically going round to my mum's for tea, and she used to have a surround sound system, but Coronation Street would always be on, and you'd basically just have, if characters were in the pub, you'd have like mumbling of people in the pub in one speaker over there somewhere, and then the rest of it was on the other speakers, and it just sounded really bizarre. Obviously that's not to say that surround sound can't be done well. I think Metal Gear Solid 4, as far as I know, has an amazing surround sound system. But certainly back in the 90s, surround sound started off as just another gimmick. Anyway, what does the magazine have to say? Ask game players what sets the next generation of games machines apart from their forebears, and you'll most likely be subjected to a treatise on 32-bit image manipulation, polygon counts and texture mapping, and light sourcing. This is, of course, fine and dandy, We all know that machines like the PlayStation can blow your socks off with a bombardment of gorgeous graphics. Less universally realised is the astounding audio quality that CD-based games platforms can deliver. Not only can a PlayStation game carry the same high-fidelity full bandwidth audio as a normal music CD, but it can be encoded in any one of a multitude of proprietary sound systems designed to create a huge spatial soundstage like Q-Sound or even Dolby Surround, the very same surround sound used in movie theatres. To understand what Dolby Surround can bring to video games, it's worth taking time out to track the evolution of its cinematic sibling. The technology dates back 20 years and until recently was known, in cinemas at least, as Dolby Stereo. First introduced on Barbra Streisand's A Star Is Born and popularised in theatres across the world by Star Wars, it brought to cinemas dramatic audio effects, clearer dialogue, richer music, and a surround ambience able to fill an auditorium. Hollywood embraced the technology, and now there's a massive back catalogue of Dolby Stereo movies. When these films are broadcast in Nicam stereo on TV, or transferred to hi-fi videotape or laserdisc, the surround information is transferred, enabling it to be decoded in the home. A Dolby Stereo film soundtrack consists of 4 channels, stereo left and right for music, a centre channel for music, speech and Foley effects, and a rear channel for effects and music. All 4 channels of sound are carried within the conventional stereo optical print. When the movie is mixed on a soundstage, it passes through a Dolby encoder using a system called Matrix 424. Special steering circuitry enhances front-to-back separation, and audio quality is improved by using a variation of Dolby A-type noise reduction. When a Dolby Stereo print is released on videotape, the surround signals buried within the soundtrack are retained. Pro Logic is now the standard method of decoding Dolby Stereo surround signals in the home. The rest of this feature is simply an advert, I would say, for incredibly expensive hardware, basically detailing the best of the best at the time in the 90s on what you could purchase if you wanted a really high fidelity surround system. Now on to the reviews, kicking off with Battle Arena Toshinden 2. In a spooky coincidence of proportions, Bermuda Triangular Battle Arena Toshinden 2 not only has 11 start-off fighters, it happens to be the 11th beat-em-up for the PlayStation, and we write this on day 11 of the month. But enough high-faulting mystic meggery, this is brawling fare and no mistake. Toshinden blows back into the Windy City replete with added bruisers and a sneaky increase in speed, but is this enough to vanquish the mighty power that is Tekken? Can the arena of battle be taken by Toshinden? The graphics are more accomplished, but not to any significant degree over its antecedent. Each character now has overdrive moves which can only be brought to bear when the opponent's power bar has trickled out, after you've persistently caught them with blows. And that's about it as far as new things go. Sure, there are some interesting backdrops, battles taking place at different times of day, but Toshinden 2 is very much a rejigged sequel as opposed to an out-and-out new game. For all the finery and having the opportunity to tinker with Tekken 2, one cannot help but feel that Toshinden 2 would last but a Bruno if head came to head. You can chuck as many projectiles as you like, but once you've witnessed the glorious animation of Tekken's players, you tend to balk at anything that steps in your path, and Toshinden 2 simply doesn't do enough to suggest that it wants to be anything other than Toshinden once more. Yet for all the comparisons with the master of all it surveys, Toshinden 2 is a decent 3D beat-em-up and deserving of attention. The fighters are incredibly detailed, their garage-shaded polygons enhanced from the original, but Tekken's gameplay still runs rings around this sequel, so 7 it is. And this is where PSM introduced a new feature in each of its reviews, where it shows titles in the same genre and lists them in score order, so it's showing that alternatively you can pick up these games. And of course at the moment Tekken stands above all other beat-em-ups. Extreme Pinball gets a 3 out of 10. PSM were extremely disappointed that this game chose to go with a 2D graphic style rather than a 3D one. Have the folk responsible never played Amiga's Pinball Dreams Fantasies and Illusions, or Slam Tilt? Do they seriously believe that Extreme Pinball deserves to be on the same PlayStation platform as True Pinball? Their train departed over 2 years ago. Don't even consider buying this game. Let us first use the stopwatch and check some disk loading times. If you wish to boot up and flip off, it takes some 2 minutes and 30 seconds to get to a table. The first 1.5 sees you bound for menu screen, and it requires a further minute to load a table. We decided we'd had enough of the Medieval Knights table, feeling a shuffle-on rock fantasy might pepper the mood. It took 45 seconds to return to the options screen, and another 105 seconds to load the latter table. What on earth is the poor machine having to load? This is a 2D pinball game, for heaven's sake. We saw a preview for In the Hunt in a previous issue, and it looked really good to me, but it gets a 5 out of 10 in the review. While not everyone would agree that the advent of decent 3D has brought about an improvement in the shoot-'em-up genre, not many would deny that the classic blaster has become all but extinct. As a reminder of its passing comes the emaciated and twitching corpse that is In the Hunt. In the interest of fairness, it should first be stated that In the Hunt is by no means a pathetic example of its type, but at the same time, it contains enough fundamental flaws and fails to live up to what has gone before, to a sufficient degree. As a result of the underwater scenario, the game takes place on 2 levels. Below the surface, you can concentrate your attacks using torpedoes and depth charges. However, frequent assaults come from the air, as attack choppers and other craft drop a variety of explosives on you. You can answer these attacks using sea-to-air missiles, but in order to do so, you have to rise up to the surface of the water to fire. This is actually one of the more original touches in the game, but that's about as unique as the gameplay gets, with the rest of the challenge relying on wading through waves of attackers, picking up bonuses, and ultimately doing battle with a huge boss at the end of each level. To compensate for this lack of originality, the developer, it seems, decided to cram in as many enemies and hazards as the PlayStation's internal processors could possibly cope with. In truth, they crammed in more enemies and hazards than the PlayStation's internal processors could cope with, as is entirely evident from the distracting slowdown experienced whenever things get a little hairy. On top of this, the sheer weight of opposition at times proves too much for even the keenest of eyes to keep track of. At its worst, the on-screen bedlam renders your sub invisible, making it very difficult indeed to employ any sort of survival strategies at all. Next up is Siberia, and that's with a C, not an S. When Siberia came out on the PC over a year ago, it was already a little dated on the conceptual side. You see, once upon a time, before the days of Doom or Descent, you had a choice. You either had lots of lovely rendered bits with little gameplay, or you had loads of gameplay and workmanlike graphics. Then it all got complex, and the trade-off between graphics and gameplay became less distinct. In many ways this was a good thing, but some people have tried to cheat and make us think that we could have full freedom of movement around an imaginary environment and gorgeous state-of-the-art graphics too. It was, of course, bunkum, and few of us were fooled. This makes the release of Siberia on the PlayStation 12 months later all the more insulting. Essentially, it's one long CD-ROM storybook, with the occasional opportunity for you to nudge the plot in the appropriate direction. It's not as crude as the classic and awful coin-op Dragon's Lair, you understand. No, in this game you get to direct your character, enabling him to walk in whichever direction you want, as long as the linear nature of the gameplay allows you to travel in that direction, of course. For example, it's quite possible to be in a fairly open space with a seemingly limitless range of directions to move in, but no, instead you can only face in 2 directions. It sort of makes a nonsense of you being able to control your character in the first place. Siberia is a dated concept with very little in the way of entertaining gameplay, 5 out of 10. Another 5 out of 10 here, it's PO'd. Strange name, familiar game, say hello or wave goodbye to Time Warner Interactive's Doom-esque 3D action game. Starting off as you do on level 1, The pan is your only weapon, which unfortunately means that you have to get close to the enemy contingent if you are going to give them a good slamming. Wait, a frying pan as a weapon? Another one that we read a preview for in a previous issue, Chronicles of the Sword, gets a 5 out of 10. Your first encounter with Chronicles of the Sword bears resemblance to that school trip. At every gate stands a belligerent guard, and you spend most of your time wandering between courtyard and chapel in Camelot. Not the Lancashire theme park, one hastens. Gawain is a jerky fellow. The animation flickers painfully as he totters across the courtyard, and there's more than a fair chance you'll be rid of the music within 10 minutes. It squeaks along like one of those dodgy little Casio synthesizer things you got bored with on Christmas Day 1983. Still, perhaps it was all the rage in 420 AD. The sprite animation is considerably less satisfying than the ornate backgrounds. Cherish the brickwork and the flickering candles. Admire the sword, tankard and skull. Programmer Synthetic Dimensions has done a decent job on the graphics. Controlling young Gawain can be rather a pain. We're fortunate to have a mouse which speeds up the process a tad, but you have to move the pointer all over the screen. In one instance, there was a set of stairs we didn't believe we could mount because the feet icon only showed on about one step. And not only is the control fiddly, the constant retreading of steps becomes mighty dull. After you've watched the knight trudge across the yard for the umpteenth time, you really want to shout, "Step up, good fellow," or something to that effect. It's a rather sloppy affair. Sadly, we were all excited about this game until we played it. Await Resident Evil next month, readers. Chessmaster 3D is the joint highest reviewed game in this issue, alongside Williams' Arcade's Greatest Hits, with a 7 out of 10. It's chess. We presume you know what that means, but in the meantime, here's a dictionary definition. Chess is a game of skill for two players using a chessboard, a square board divided into 64 squares of two alternating colours, on which chessmen are moved. That's sexist. Initially, each player has 1 king, 1 queen, 2 rooks, 2 bishops, 2 knights and 8 pawns, which, well, you get what chess is. I don't need to continue with that. And that's it for this issue of the official PlayStation magazine. It's been a bit of a different one this time, a bit sparse maybe. It seems to have mainly been a barrage of announcements and previews for games that are coming out, were coming out at the time. Anyway, hope you enjoyed this video. I've been Jake of the Retro Perspective, and I'll see you next time.